Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 22 of Nostalgia Talk. This is actually the first time that the episode number matches my age, which will probably never happen again, so you might as well enjoy this one. First of all, happy April Fool's Day. I hope you guys liked my little April Fool's prank earlier, my little joke. Sorry to those who were disappointed, but I know, for anyone asking, I don't actually have a rubber ducky. That's the closest thing I have to it, that little plush doll. So sorry to disappoint. And for anyone asking, no, it doesn't actually squeak. That was a sound effect that I just edited in. So today on Nostalgia Talk, joining me is Ed Valentine.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. And since today is April Fool's Day, I guess it's best to say that Ed is a comedy writer. He has done multiple TV work. He did Doc McStuffins, Marvel's Avengers Assemble. He did Ultimate Spider-Man. He did a lot of writing for Sesame Street. And here's some little nostalgia for all you guys out there. He was a writer on one of my favorite shows, which just turned 20 this week, the Fairly OddParents. So that means that Ed was the person who wrote in the scripts that Timmy Turner would be making a wish with the help of his fairy godparents.
I can't believe it's 20 years old. That's sort of shocking to me. I don't kind of know where that time's gone.
That was always the first show. My family's a bunch of early risers, and it was on at 6 a.m. our time, and that was the first thing I would watch in the morning.
That is awesome. Well, it was my first my first full-time writing job, my first staff writing job out of the Nickelodeon Writing Fellowship.
Nice.
I was hired while I was a Nick Writing Fellow, which you may know, and some of your listeners may know, is just a great program that brings in a few writers every year from both the States and internationally. And kind of teaches them about Nickelodeon and introduces them to people and really gave me a huge start when I was just starting out. So I'm really proud to have been a part of that.
Well, Nickelodeon was actually the very thing one of the very things, but for the most part is actually what inspired me to want to become a writer.
Wow.
A lot of their live action shows that I was watching as a teenager, I felt that they were very similar to my own life. And so I kind of used that to write up my own stories.
That's awesome. For me, I never had watched too much Nickelodeon growing up until I went to grad school. And then I started really getting into the shows that were on Nick. And to be there at the building, I don't know if have you ever seen pictures of the Nick campus in Burbank?
I have a few times.
Yeah, it's cool, right? They had, I don't know what it's like now. I know they've changed things, but they had these crazy topiaries at the time, and like a big orange gate with a big foot on it, and a staircase made to look like a cascading waterfall of slime. Yeah, wow. It was a really cool, like just stepping in, you kind of felt like you were on a Nickelodeon show, and that was exciting.
We actually did a school project once where because there's some decent film experience here in Nova Scotia, not much, but we did a little project where we had to actually write like a letter, like a little practice letter to a company that we would hand into our teacher. So it was like our teacher was in charge of hiring, and so I asked my teacher, look, I was inspired by Nickelodeon. Are you okay with me making mine to Nickelodeon? She's like, yeah, sure, go ahead.
That's awesome. Yeah. What a great, it's such a great fertile environment, and a place that really emphasized the funny, right? Like they really wanted you to bring your comic talents and your comic voice to whatever you did there. So it was a really good fit for me, just out of grad school. And also I think I have a big imagination that that was a good fit for the Nickelodeon ethos and programming.
Nice. That's great. And the fact that the Fairly OddParents and other Nickelodeon shows, a lot I grew up with, like SpongeBob and Rugrats, Hey Arnold, and even now the Loud House, like they're so wildly popular, and a lot of them have been running for years. Like I think it's common knowledge that SpongeBob is never going to end.
I hope it never does. I always used to enjoy, they had kind of the SpongeBob writers and artists had kind of a cocktail hour, and they had kind of tiki themed huts in their offices, and just I always used to enjoy being around just the kind of the fun that they were having. It was a good time.
They were in Squidward's Tiki Land.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean,
We're in Squidward's Tiki Land.
well, like a place where, that kind of where you're allowed to wear Hawaiian shirts to work, and leis, and and grass skirts, like that's my place of business.
I should have worn my Hawaiian shirt just for this, but I'm wearing my Mickey Mouse and Friends shirt.
Oh, okay. Well, that's acceptable too.
Okay, thank God.
What would you like to know? How can I?
All right, let's get right down to business.
What do you want to hear?
All right, so let's start with an easy one. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I don't mean beginning of the world. I mean beginning of your, beginning of your interest. This actually falls under the lines that this actually falls under the lines of a question that somebody I went to school with by the name of Brandon Cadman was asking. And we both kind of want to know, what got you interested in screenwriting and the industry?
Yeah, well, I would say that the thing that got me into it in the first place was being one of the early viewers of Sesame Street. I'm old enough to be an early viewer of Sesame, and Sesame was sort of a gateway drug to the Muppet Show for me. And I think I always imagined that the world of show business would be like the Muppet Show, right? With wacky characters putting on a show. I would say, though, to go really far back, really, Sesame was the thing that not just taught me to read and write, but also taught me life lessons about being a decent person, a good neighbor, a good friend, a member of a community. The diversity of human and Muppet life on Sesame Street was really very important to me, and that's the thing that sort of I carried with me. It's kind of impossible to state how formative that show was for me. So I think that's well before I wanted to be in theater or in film or in TV. I kind of wanted to be on the street with the Muppets and with the people who spoke directly to the camera, and and really made you feel a part of things. So yeah, that's where it all started. As I say, kind of after that, I was a big fan of the Muppet Show and later the Muppet movie. And I started doing a lot of theater. I acted for a long time, and then started writing plays. I then started taking playwriting classes with the playwright Tina Howe, who some of your listeners may have heard of. She's not just a great playwright, but a really wonderful person. And she was the one who encouraged me to go back to grad school to study playwriting, but also TV and film. She knew that NYU was a place that that allowed you to study not concentrate just on one discipline, but actually take classes in television and film as well as theater. And it's there that I started writing children's shows, right? Children's TV, animated TV. And so it was from there that, gosh, man, James, it was, we're going back a few years, but it was, it just felt like an immediate fit that even though my plays are not really for kids, that children's TV and animated TV in particular was a great fit for kind of my big wild imagination and putting crazy things on screen that you can do in animation more easily than pretty much any other medium. So that's sort of where that all sort of happened. And it was from there that I wrote some pilot scripts spec scripts at the time that got that I was able to submit to Nickelodeon's writing fellowship. And that's where I began that journey over. It's kind of a funny story. I had one of my teachers had suggested that I apply to the Nick Writing Fellowship because he said, well, it's in New York, and you won't have to leave home, you won't have to leave your partner. And indeed, Nick does have a headquarters in New York. And I did, I think, 3 phone interviews without realizing that the job was actually in Burbank, and it was not in New York City.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of a bit of a surprise for both me and my partner, of like, oh wait, that job's across the country if you get it. And I was like, oh crap. But I did get the job. I'm so happy that I got to go out to California. My partner and I have been together 24 years now, so we were bi-coastal for a while. I don't know when else I would have had a chance to go out to California. And we were bi-coastal for about 7 years. And just being out there in that kind of pressure cooker of LA was a lot of fun. I made great friends with the other 2 writers in the fellowship at the time, and made wonderful friends at Nickelodeon. But now that the world, you can kind of write from anywhere, in a way that you really couldn't when I did the fellowship. I'm kind of back home on the East Coast, and I kind of go where I'm needed and Skype in or Zoom in otherwise. So yeah, that's kind of my journey through all that.
Thank God technology exists.
Yeah, it's making things a lot easier and a lot stranger in some ways. I mean, there's definitely the pandemic, I think, is changing the business some, in that people are starting to feel like, well, maybe I don't need to have my whole writing room in the same city. Maybe we can be, across the nation or internationally. So it's making things, it's changing things in some significant and really interesting ways. It's making new opportunities, I think.
So it was just like kids TV that you were mostly interested in writing for, like Sesame Street and the Muppet Show. Was there anything else that inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always like to say that shows. I was really fascinated with television as a kid.
How could you not be?
Right. So I watched more TV than was probably healthy, but I also wasn't very sort of discriminating about which shows we were supposed to watch, right? In air quotes. So like I remember being 3 and watching like watching like Bullwinkle, right? Or Underdog. And those shows definitely, Flintstones too. People don't realize, but the Flintstones was never meant to be a kids show at the time, right? Like it was, right. It had a an adult sense about it, and certainly Bullwinkle and Underdog would slip in jokes that were way above a 3-year-old's kind of understanding. What I always point out, though, is that kids know, like, I'm a big believer, and I really like to fight against the idea that kids shows should water things down or pull their punches. I always knew from Bullwinkle that even if I didn't get the joke when I was 3, 4, and 5 years old, I knew that there was a joke going on that I wanted to get. And I think it made me smarter. I think that it developed my sense of humor in a way that there are certainly some kids shows that don't have kind of a rollicking sense of humor or a cheeky sense of humor. Those are kind of my favorite shows. But yeah, I think the stuff I always watched was I grew up watching the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, and just enjoyed sitcoms, like even crummy ones. I liked a lot of different stuff. So I didn't entirely set out to write children's television, and certainly not preschool television, but I think I'm attracted to a project that has a great sense of humor. Anything with puppets, I'm always interested in, and stuff that's kind of not on the mean side. My sense of humor isn't too mean. So yeah, kids TV is sometimes a good fit for me.
It's interesting with what you were saying about some of the jokes in certain cartoons being above, what people of a certain age might understand. Of course, as we're all seeing with Looney Tunes with
Right.
Pepe Le Pew.
Right. So like, and we also, recognize that not all jokes stand the test of time, right?
Right.
There's there's some stuff that just doesn't fly, not just cultural sensibilities, but just sense of humor, right? Like there are some things that we can, like some old silent movies might have killed, and some of them are still really funny, but there's some stuff that you're like, why was anybody laughing at this? I don't know why would anyone think this is funny? Humor is really, it's just hard that way. God, what was I watching the other day? I watched something, and it'll probably come back to me 10 minutes from now, but I watched something and I was like, that is still as funny as I remembered it, and still made me laugh. And that's it's kind of hard to do.
Right. Oh yeah, I think I kind of understand what you're referring to there.
Yeah,
I don't know what film you're talking about,
yeah,
but
I can't remember either, but I remember watching something and I was like, wow, man, that still works. That thing still works all this time later. And now it's gone. And if I remember, I'll tell you.
feel free.
Yeah.
So your first professional writing job, was that the Fairly OddParents?
Yeah, it's funny. And Odd Parents was the first show I was hired on as a full-time head writer. The
Oh, you were head writer of that
No, I'm
show.
sorry. I'm sorry. As a staff writer. I was definitely not head writer of the Fairly
Oh,
Odd
okay.
Parents. I have subsequently been a head writer on shows, but I was a staff writer on Fairly Odd Parents for season 7. I think it was season 7. And at the same time, I was through my theater work and through my class with Tina, who I mentioned earlier. Um, I had come to the attention of the guy who was the head writer of Sesame Street at the time, whose name was Lou Berger, and he had gotten to know my theater work because he gave a theater award to Tina's playwriting class. And I had never met him. Several years later, I met him when he came to NYU to speak, and I introduced myself. I got
Cool.
to thank him in person for his award that he gave out, and he invited me to meet with him, and he asked if I'd be interested in auditioning to write for Sesame. And so I submitted several scripts, submitted a bunch of my work, and that's when they kind of hired me on to write for Abby's Flying Fairy School at Sesame, which I think we talked before we went on the air, about being a cartoon segment that was kind of one of the first times that they translated the Muppets into, at least on Sesame.
Yeah, that was at the time of Bert and Ernie's Great Adventures as well. Even though
Yeah,
I was like a tween to teenager at those years, but anytime a new episode of Sesame Street was airing, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm taping this," and I'd watch it once I came home from school.
yeah. Well, I think it was a little strange because they weren't Muppets, right? But
Oh yeah.
they were trying to figure out a way to translate them into a 3D cartoon environment, and see what else they could do with the characters. And I think it was a very effective. Gotta, excuse me, sneezing there. I think
Gesundheit.
thank you. I think it was very effective in its own way. One of my favorite stories about it was that, I guess this is true. I've just heard this through the grapevine, that the original tests for the characters, they built a 3D skeleton for each of the characters, that they could animate around, and then at some point they were like, they don't move like the Muppets. The Abby as a cartoon doesn't move like Abby. Why is that so? And they figured out that if they built it around the model of a human hand and the way that a hand fits inside a puppet, that it actually looked a lot more Muppety, and a lot more true to the movement and kind of soul of those characters that we know.
Hmm.
So I really appreciated that they kind of thought through the animation in a puppety way.
Hmm.
Um, so that's how I started on Sesame. And it was from there that the new head writer, Joey Masourino,
Who, in addition to being head writer, just for any of you guys who aren't aware, Joey Masourino was also one of the Muppet performers. He did Mary Monster, Papa Bear, Two-Headed Monster, Stinky the Stinkweed, and the host of Sesame Street during my junior high and early high school years, Murray Monster.
Murray, yeah. And Joey had an amazing sense of humor, and just a great rollicking spirit to him. And he got to know me through my writing on Abby's Flying Fairy School, and then brought me on to the street itself. So I was writing for Sesame for several years.
And Joey also did the voice of Blog, the troll from
That's
Abby's
right.
Flying Fairy School.
That's right.
School. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny, and such just a great writer and great performer and great person all around.
Well, it's funny because as soon as you sneezed, I immediately while you were talking about Abby's Flying Fairy School, I immediately heard Joey Masourino as Blog in my head, because I remember there was an Abby's Flying Fairy School segment where I think they sneezed and turned into frogs or something, and it's like, well, what magic word could we use? And I remember Blog saying, I always say alakabooger.
Yeah. I remember that episode, and there was a lot of sneezing. Like chickens, sneezing is almost always funny.
Yeah, they were turning into frogs and chickens. Now that's all coming back to me.
Probably. Yeah, it was great. And like it was just, I remember my first Sesame Street episode that I wrote. Grover had in this episode, Grover had found some junk around Sesame Street, and he was convinced that they were dinosaur bones, and they weren't. It was like old pieces of a xylophone and a spatula and these different things, and his friends on the street helped him figure out how to, okay, well, it's not really a dinosaur, but we can put it together in a dinosaur model. So there was a very heavy STEM curriculum, science, technology, engineering, and math at the time. And so they made a model of a dinosaur. And my first, I'd written a very wordy song called the Paleontologist Conga. And what was so fantastic, it was meant to be sung by, I guess it was Elmo and Grover. And I think maybe it was Rosita. I can't remember who was the third.
I remember her being in that episode.
Was she in that one? Yeah, I think she was. And it was meant to be sung by them. But by the time I'd got into the studio, they suddenly had figured out, and I think it was Joey who was like, well, gosh, why don't we send them on why don't we do kind of for the musical number, like a dream sequence where they're on a paleontologist dig. And so everybody was suddenly in pith helmets with shovels, and they had these whatnot Muppets be paleontologists, and they had these giant bones they were digging up out of the sand. So it was just this kind of like, it was this kind of wonderful thing where you write something that you love and you're proud of. And like so much of TV, other people make it better, and the collaboration with others take it to this exponential level that you didn't see it going, that made it so much better.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember when that episode was brand new, and I remember on the TV guide, I think it was Sesame Osaurus or something, and I was like, yeah, I gotta see that. It's like, I was 14 at the time, and by then everyone I know is getting into stuff like Game of Thrones. So right. What happens when you get to the end of Game of Thrones? Cliffhanger. So that's what it was like for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you saw that episode. That was my very first Sesame episode, and I was, just kind of the magic of being on the set of the street. And again, working with people who just kind of are like I was coming from a background where, how can I put this, in TV, so much of the time, especially if you're working on a 3D show, or CG show, everything costs money, right? Like every time you put another prop or a costume on a character, you have to factor in the lighting and rigging of that CG character. And so I was like, I wouldn't have thought about writing a scene on an archaeological dig and like having them spend all that money, but working with people who were like, yeah, we can totally do that. We'll we've got some old bones. We'll dress some Muppets. We've got pith helmets. We'll sure we can do that. Like knowing that was kind of mind blowing. And in some ways really kind of freeing, because you realize, well, I can write a lot more stuff than we can physically, practically do. And in some ways more than you can do in CG. It's like, it was actually more things were possible than are sometimes possible in CG.
Nice. But it's so cool that you actually got to show some of your Sesame Street scripts to one of my writing idols, Lou Berger.
Yeah, you know Lou.
Oh, I've never actually had a conversation with him, but I know who he is. He was head writer for Sesame Street during my single digit years of watching the show.
Gotcha. Yeah, Lou was just such a wonderful man, and is still. I'm not in touch with him often. I should give him a call, but he is, as a writer and just a lively and lovely person. And yeah, he's the one who brought me into Sesame at the very same time that my this parallel track at the same time my Nickelodeon life was taking off. So I guess the whole kids TV thing was meant to be. It all happened at the same time.
All thanks to Lou Berger.
Lou, Tina Howe, Joey Masourino, they're people who brought me in that world. Karen Kirkland was my was the head of the Nickelodeon writing program, who is now left there. She's now my agent.
Oh wow.
And so yeah, we've had a relationship for so many years now. I just am really, really grateful for all these people who kind of brought me into this world. I really, really like what I do. I'm back at Nickelodeon. I wrote lately on a show that you'll be hearing about soon called Shark Dog. That's going to be on Netflix, premiering, I hope and trust, at some point this year. That I was the head writer for. I was the head writer of Shark Dog for season 1. And it's going to be animated, a Nickelodeon animated show that's going to be on Netflix. So that's happening. It's kind of nice to be back in the Nickelodeon fold. So there's that to look forward to.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to check it out. And also, Lou Berger, if you're listening, send me a message because I'd love to interview you as well.
I will drop him a line. I owe him so much of my career, and I would love to be back in touch with him. I'll have to get back in touch with him too. Yeah.
Well, tell him I said hi.
You bet. Absolutely.
So when you started with Sesame Street, did you get any advice at all from any other writers, like people that have been there for a long, long time? People like Louise Santiro. I hope I said that right.
Louise Santiro. Yep.
Yeah.
We were very close. All the other writers who were on, and Emily Pearl Kingsley had been on since, I believe it was season 2.
Yep.
So at the time, and things have changed a bit now, there was a kind of a brain trust of people who'd been on there for a very, very long time, and who kind of had an institutional memory of different shows that they'd done. And you could pitch stuff and then be like, oh, well, we did something like that in season 4, and here's what we can, here's a way it could be different this time around if you chose to do something along that line. So yeah, everybody, it was very much a family for the years that I was writing on it.
Nice.
I think one of the proudest things that I was able to do was work internationally. I worked for several years with Sesame International, and I had wrote a number of shows. I'm sure you know, James, but there many of your listeners may not. I don't think I knew the scope of it until I started working with the international division, but they have over 40 co-productions all around the world of Sesame Street in different countries. And so I was able to work with the Indian team for, I think, 3 different times. I worked once with the Bangladesh team, and I worked once with the team from Afghanistan.
Wow.
Yeah. So being able to do shows that really were able to meet kids where they are, and address things that were specific to a particular country or culture, was really, really wonderful. The trick was that just so your listeners know, like that Sesame would have a co-production with writers, puppeteers, musicians, directors, camera people, like designers, animators from that particular country. And then it would be, the Sesame producers who would go over there to work with the local producers, and the writer. They'd bring a writer over, in that case me, to work with local writers, to really develop their own authentic voice, as Indians or Afghanis or Bangladesh citizens. And it was really, really beautiful to be able to work cross-culturally on projects that I think reached kids where they needed to be.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was great.
Since we were talking about classic Sesame Street writers like Louis Santiro, and another one of my idols, by the way, is Molly Boylan.
Of course, yes.
I'd love to interview her as well. So if any of the Sesame Street writers are that I haven't talked to yet are listening, feel free to drop me a line or something. But I think you were working with the show around the time that they did a little tribute episode to Judy Fruberg that Molly Boylan had written. And somebody that I'm very close with, Chris Surf, did a lot of the music for that. Did you know Judy Fruberg at all?
I didn't. I mean, I had crossed paths, but didn't know in any close way. Yeah.
It's too bad. I think they also did a Jerry Nelson tribute episode that season.
I think so too. Yeah.
I remember that one as well, because I was in high school and I was so excited about it. It was it aired on Halloween and I was going trick-or-treating with one of my best friends, and I was like, you know what? I'll just watch this tomorrow morning. I want to hang out with my friend.
What's so funny too about TV seasons, and Sesame is no exception. Unlike shows that go on a regular network TV, I guess they're becoming fewer and fewer, right? But regular network TV has a set season with a set premiere date and kind of a everything is intensely geared to what that season is. On Sesame and certainly on Nickelodeon, many of the seasons that I write for happen so far after you've actually written or filmed them, especially like with some of the Odd Parent shows I wrote. I think there were, as I recall, the last season I wrote, it was several years before some of them went on.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Like,
wow.
Especially with animated television, there can be a huge lag time between you're actually writing something and sending in your final draft to it actually being on the air. You probably know I wrote for My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic.
Yeah, I actually got to interview Spins.
Oh, awesome.
Lee Toker.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that show, it was great because the Bronies are such a lively fandom that they would let me know sometimes when something was on. And they'd be like, your episode's coming up. And I'd be like, oh, I didn't even realize that. Right. Like, there are sometimes years between the time you're actually finished something and the time it gets animated and produced and physically is ready to air by whatever network it is. So it's so funny when you kind of say, oh, there was this show or that show during that season, but you sometimes don't really, like, you don't have the same awareness as a TV writer sometimes that you would if you were on network television of like what season 42 is or what exactly happened during that season. It's a little harder to keep that straight.
I remember one time we were going on a family road trip. I forget where to, but I had my iPad with me and I was like, I downloaded a couple of old Sesame Streets, mostly from season 20. And my sister's like, why just from that?
Why just from that? Indeed. What was the reasoning?
It was because this is actually going to make me sound like more of a nerd than I usually sound like, but it's because I was at my grandfather's cottage with him, and I downloaded a couple of Sesame Street episodes that I had just kind of randomly,
Yeah.
and some of them were from season 20, and this was before I was even born, and a lot of the film pieces that were in it had a lot of nice calming music, most of which was done by the great Joe Raposo.
Awesome, great composer and great content. I know I can immediately think of some of the films you're probably thinking of. But yeah, no, like it's something that may mean more to a viewer than to a writer sometimes. So yeah, I was always shocked when I'd get messages from the bronies being like, "Hey, are you live tweeting the show this Saturday?" And I'd be like, "Oh, is it on? Oh yeah, then I totally am. I totally will." Right? Like it's just people, I think people have a lot of misconceptions about like, well, certainly also about writers. They think that a writer is responsible for everything that goes on screen. There's
It's one thing to just type up what people are going to be saying, but it's another thing to actually decide what's going to be happening.
well, right, and especially if you're talking about animation, right? So I remember I wrote an episode for My Little Pony called Three's a Crowd, where Discord um, was in the end feigning sickness to kind of curry favor with the other ponies and to try to make friends, right? And I did a Gilbert and Sullivan-esque patter song. I'd written the lyrics for kind of an increasingly elaborate patter song of all the things he wanted before he would go to Discord, before he would go to bed. And the animation came back and it was just the wildest stuff. Like there was one point where he was oh my gosh, I think they had him dressed like Hunter S. Thompson from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like they had all these crazy outfits on him that like I'd never written. And that's definitely an instance where like I said with my paleontologist episode of Sesame, that you kind of hand stuff over in television to other people and they put their own ideas in. So it's always funny to me when I get people writing, when people write to you either for good or ill, and they're like, "I love this thing that you wrote," or "I hate this thing that you wrote."
Why would anyone want to do that?
Well, why would people write to you like that?
Well, I mean, it's one thing to come from like the directors and the producers, but it's another thing to get it from fans.
Well, it's funny because people don't always realize that when you are writing for television, you're not writing in a vacuum. You're often writing in a writer's room. You're almost always writing for some head writer. And then plus in animation, you're also working with board artists, right? And animators and colorists and all sorts of things that there are just a lot of people in the mix who add and hopefully not too often subtract from what you do. But sometimes that happens too. So it's always kind of funny when somebody writes specifically like, this line when so and so said this, and like half the time you didn't write that line, right? Like, or it made me so upset when when this happened, and like, yeah, half the time it's you and half the time it might not be. It could be something else. It's just it's sort of an interesting dynamic, that conversation between writer and fan.
Were you ever on set of Sesame Street when they would have Frank Oz or Jerry Nelson there?
No, neither of them were there during the time I was there.
Aww.
And but what I love is that the performers who are doing their characters now are really working so hard to keep their legacy and to try to and try to be faithful to the characters, and they do, right? Like it's kind of a really loving legacy that they stick to there. So even though I didn't have those experiences, I think the I kind of feel like I did in a way, because those characters are there and they're still so present, in forms that we recognize. So, Grover's not a different Grover now that Eric Jacobson's doing him. He's still Grover. His heart is still there. And so, Big Bird is still Big Bird, even though I was certainly there when Carol Spinney was there.
I was just wondering that.
Yeah, I was there while Carol was there, but Matt Vogel, the work he's done to kind of lovingly recreate, and it's not a recreation. It's this kind of weird alchemy of making it still live, right? Like it's just a beautiful thing that Carol was getting older by the time that I got there, and so he would sometimes be playing Big Bird, but sometimes he'd be doing the voice while Matt would be doing the motion. It depended on kind of what time of day it was, and it's very taxing, as you can imagine, being Big Bird. I have not had the experience, but I can imagine that it would be exhausting. And so yeah, I was definitely there when Carol was there. I'm just in awe of the Muppeteers, of the Sesame Street Muppeteers, to be able to carry on the way they do. It's really touching to me.
And especially with David Rudman doing Cookie Monster, and you wrote a few of the Crummy Pictures segments.
I did, yeah. Yeah, those were really challenging. I think because they had a game show element, so you had to the curriculum at the time, and of course you're always with Sesame, because it is an educational show at heart. You are kind of trying to make sure that the curriculum fits, as well as the characters and the sense of humor. The Crummy Pictures were really, really fun. But the big challenge was trying to figure out how to work in the curriculum, and how to have that interplay that Cookie, that Cookie is kind of talking to you as the viewer to help him solve the problem, solve the game show. So yeah, that was definitely a challenging thing. That's different. It was kind of different from everything else that we worked on Sesame at the time.
I do remember there was actually a couple of game shows the Cookie Monster was on at that time that Guy Smiley was hosting.
Right.
And that kind of was a little bit of a throwback to one of my, maybe even my very favorite Sesame Street skit. Did you happen to see the one where Cookie Monster was on Guy Smiley's game show and basically drove a train into the studio?
Oh my gosh, I think I remember that one. I can't I think I remember that happening.
That is one of the best segments ever.
Well, the difference with when Guy Smiley was on, and it's kind of funny, isn't it? Because when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, game shows were like, your daily game show was like a big deal. Your Price is Right, oh my gosh, Hollywood Squares, all these different shows were so popular that it's kind of, they're on, but they're not. They don't have, like soap operas. They don't have the same cultural cachet that they did at one time in history. The difference between Crummy Pictures and the old Guy Smiley episodes was Guy Smiley was really the host, and he would have Cookie or another Muppet on, trying to kind of solving the problem as someone would in a game show, someone that you'd view, a contestant on The Price is Right. The difference with Crummy Pictures, and what made it particularly a challenging thing to try to figure out, was that Cookie was both the host and also kind of trying to solve the problem himself with the viewer. So there was that sort of direct address to the viewer. Yeah, Cookie wasn't really the contestant. The viewer was the contestant, right? So like,
I like that.
The viewer, like, he would be talking to you at home and being like, which of these three things do Cookie choose? And so, not that I can do a Cookie voice, but he would be,
which of these do me choose?
Much better. Really carries it. Yeah. So he would so he would be trying to get you, the viewer, to give a response, and there was a lot of figuring out of how best to phrase the response so that you would prime the viewer for success, and help them figure out the answer without giving them the answer. So it was a little puzzle. It was a bit of a puzzle to be like, okay, how do we make this happen in the way we want this to happen? It's a lot harder and a lot different from Guy Smiley just going on and being like, which of these things belongs with the letter A, right? And like, it's a different when a Sesame Street Muppet or a whatnot has to answer that question themselves rather than when you at home have to do it. It's a different proposition.
Interesting. It's almost very similar to Adventures of Elmo and Grouchland, which is one of the feature films that they did, where Elmo is saying to the viewer, okay, I almost said, how do I get out of this? How does Elmo get out of this?
Right. Yeah. Right. So this is, there are many TV shows, and especially preschool children's shows, that kind of work on that form of direct address. And Elmo is a great character to be able to convey that, and he has such a direct connection with the viewer, and kids really do talk back to Elmo, right? So that is a different philosophy. Just a writing, it takes a different writing thing when you're showing Grover in a situation, in a street story, where he's not necessarily talking to the viewer. I love that Sesame did both at different times.
Did you have a favorite Muppet character to write for?
I have to say, I always loved writing for Grover. I mean, I loved writing for all of them, but Grover was particularly fun. For me, I think I probably have a lot of Grover in me. So an episode there was an episode called Grover Does It All that might have been
yes.
Yeah, that might have been one of the last ones I wrote for Sesame. And in it, well, you've seen it, so you know that Grover decides on the same day that he wants to be an artist and a cook and a basketball player and I think he was a ballet dancer at one point, and
I remember a musician being one of them.
Yeah, I think he wanted to play trombone or something. So poor Grover was trying to do all these things at the very same time. And I think it was Chris who was with him, and Chris was like, "Oh no, I wasn't Chris. It's been a little while since I wrote this, but I think I'm mixing that up with a different one." But whoever he was,
I remember Bob was in it.
I can't remember. It's been a couple of years, as I say. Seasons go by after you've written them. But anyway, whoever his buddy was trying to tell him, Grover, you might want to practice being good at one thing at a time, and try one thing at a time rather than trying to do them all. And so that's very me, to try to be oh, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And of course, Grover couldn't do them all at the same time. And he kind of needed to slow down, start again, not get frustrated, and focus. So yeah, Grover, I think Grover was always very dear to my heart because he had a lot of, we have a lot in common, Grover and me.
And with him not being able to do it all, yet he was such a jack of all trades type of character. He did a little bit of everything.
That's right. I mean, especially in the early days, he'd be a waiter or he'd be a cab driver, right? He did all these different things. What was super fun was writing that episode because his long spindly arms are so funny. So watching him trying to literally juggle all these different things at the same time was hilarious.
There was a TV special. It was the 20th anniversary TV special where Kermit, this was back in the late 80s, Kermit was on location and Grover was everywhere. And basically Kermit's like, today we're going to be asking people, can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? And Grover comes in as an ice cream salesman. So it's ice cream, get your Tootsie Fruity. And then in the second little fragment with Kermit, he hears a jackhammer. It's Grover, what are you doing? My afternoon job.
is so Grover, right? So it seemed natural that he would like try to do everything at the very same time. And I've always found, for me, the best episodes of anything I write are always things that are rooted in my experience in some way or another. There's always, going back to something that's true to me is something that, that even if I didn't experience it myself, even if it's something that happened to, a friend of mine from second grade, right? Like the time in third grade where the kid moved from Germany, who I became really close friends with because he didn't speak much English, right? Like that wasn't my story. It was, he was going through it. But going back to what I observed in him, or what I learned from him, his name was Peter, and what it was like for him to be a fish out of water. Like those are things that I try to bring to a script when I'm like, where's, what is this really about? What is important to me about this? What is true? I think no matter what I'm writing, I try to bring that, bring some part of my real life experience to it. That's how I try to approach stuff.
Awesome. So when you were doing Sesame Street, obviously every episode nowadays pretty much has a song in it, and Paul Rudolph always says, you can't call out a Sesame Street song without saying who wrote the lyrics because somebody is doing the music. And so occasionally you would write song lyrics. Did you find that more challenging than actually writing lines, like lines that they were going to be saying in conversation?
No, I loved it. I just have always had a facility for lyrics. I wrote a lot of, I wrote my own lyrics for My Little Pony as well. And that was just such a great experience. Like they encouraged songs in My Little Pony. So it was super fun for me. Like I would try to figure out the kind of flavor of song that I wanted to write. Like, where does the song, because look, I used to do a lot of theater. I always loved musicals. I did musicals a lot. I still watch a lot of musicals. So, kind of bringing that aspect of my own interest into it, was really, like coming back to what I first loved. So I think I would try to go and figure out where does the song belong in this story, and what's the vibe, what's the flavor of the song that I would want there to be in here. And yeah, lyrics just came really easy for me. It was, it's one of the things that I just love doing. And it was such a great surprise to like hand it off to someone and have them come back with this tune. Like it was just, it was so exciting.
Well, I will say you're probably better at song lyrics than I am.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you've done many of them. Maybe you need to.
And I have before, and they're bad.
Well, keep trying. Like that's the thing. Like I think the part of the trick with them is trying to make sure that the character would really say them, right? Like knowing the character that you're writing for. It's I think I would have, it came somewhat easily for me because I knew those characters really well, and knew the kind of things they say. So it wasn't, for me, it wasn't a matter of like, oh gosh, what's another rhyme between moon and June. It was putting something in having the character speak honestly, but just do it in rhyme and in rhythm.
Cool. So moving on to the Fairly OddParents. So actually, since it's getting close to Easter weekend, I had a little memory of watching the Fairly OddParents around this time period.
Wow.
But my family, we used to go to Moncton, New Brunswick, which is 2 hours away from here in Halifax for Easter weekend. We don't really do that anymore, and we can't now because,
Yeah, right.
you know. But yeah, we just drive over there, and I remember in our hotel room, what did we get for dinner? I think we got St. Hubert's, which is a very popular chicken franchise in Canada. It was either St. Hubert's or Swiss Chalet. I don't know, but I remember having chicken, and the Fairly Odd Parents was on, and I remember actually that was a really good memory for me, just sitting down and watching the Fairly Odd Parents and having chicken. And we're going out to dinner tonight, so.
Well, hopefully it'll be on wherever you go.
Oh God, I hope so. I have my iPhone with me, so maybe I'll just
Have
do
to-
that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, such good table manners I've got. So you wrote the episode that introduced the anti-poof, Foop, which is really just poof spelled backwards. Well, you co-wrote that rather.
This is awkward. I did, I guess.
You were credited.
It's been a little while. That sounds right. It's again, James, it's one of those funny things because I was in a writing room and I was only one of the staff writers on the show, and there were some other freelancers as well. It was a real TV writing room where everybody kind of had their hands in everybody else's business, and kind of collaborate. It was very collaborative in many ways, and so I will take your word for that I did. It might feel very strange that I might not remember that, but yeah, the whole, it's funny as time goes by, where as a writer, when you write as many things as I've been lucky to write, you kind of some certain things you tend to forget and lose track of.
Well, let's see if you remember this one. My favorite episode of the Fairly Odd Parents that you wrote, I mean, there are so many, but my favorite that you wrote was where Timmy's wish this time was that his mom, they never had real names. Their names were Timmy's mom and Timmy's dad. Like, you never actually get to hear their real names. I remember one episode, Timmy goes back in time to meet his parents as kids.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, Dad, well, that's my nickname. Everyone calls me, and the truck goes by, but everyone always calls me Dad.
But everyone calls me Dad, yeah.
And it's like, oh, my mom is a kid. Yeah, she's got a great name. It's truck goes by, but everyone calls her mom. So
just mom and dad.
All these years, we've never heard Timmy's parents' names. Butch Hartman actually posted to Instagram, these are Timmy's parents' real names. And I was like, ooh, this is going to be good. And then it's a video of the April Fool from the Fairly Odd Parents.
Was that today? Did you do that
today? Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, I definitely did.
How dare you, Butch?
That's right. I definitely did not write that episode. That was not,
right.
that one was not mine, but you were calling up one that I did write.
Yeah. One of my very favorites. It was, Timmy had wished that his mom would be like the best chef in the world. Their house was basically like Hansel and Gretel, the witch's house from Hansel and Gretel. And there was a couple of moments in that episode where everyone would be running through a sausage field going, I feel so greasy. Was that your idea?
So I don't remember which were particularly my ideas in there, but I do definitely remember the origin of that story. And that definitely was one that I pitched. That was one of the last ones I wrote for Odd Parents. And I think, it came from, in particular, that one came from, I mean, on the show, Timmy's mom is historically a horrible cook. And my mom was not a horrible cook, but she did not love her own cooking. And she would sometimes put, meatloaf on the table and be like, oh, I hate my own cooking. Her cooking was fine. Like, it was totally fine. But the idea of a mom whose cooking really wasn't fine. Like, as a kid, way before I ever wrote for Odd Parents, I would always wish, like, oh, I wish my mom liked her cooking better. It wasn't that I wish my mom was a better cook because I loved her food, but I kind of wish she liked it better. She just didn't enjoy it.
I guess that explains the real lesson of that episode, because I remember Timmy's mom, or Mrs. Turner. I'll just say Timmy's mom because that was her name. That was her born name, but apparently. But I remember she was on a cooking show, and because according to the rules, as it was shown there, the rules, magic was not allowed to help someone win a contest. So Timmy's mom lost all of her, what they thought was talent, and so she was making this casserole that had a live octopus in it.
That's right.
And then Timmy tasted it and he's like, you know what? This actually isn't that bad.
Not that bad, right? It looks horrible, but yeah. So I think that's where that one came from for me.
That's
And
amazing.
this idea that like, you know what if she's really not that bad? Poor Timmy's mom she wanted so badly to be seen as a good cook, and she just was not going to be. But yeah, I liked that there was kind of that little sweetness of like, wow, who knew? Who knew? Maybe it's not that terrible. Even as the octopus arms are like dragging him to hell or wherever.
To the basement, because they would
To the basement.
toss it to the basement.
There was the trap door, I believe, where they
Yes, that's right.
they would have to like pull the lever and the meatloaf would go down the chute. Yeah, the casserole. It was always the casserole. So yeah, it was fun. I mean, again, for that show was just such a great fit for me. I think the sense of humor, and the fact that we really could do anything. Like it had a cheeky sense of humor that that definitely is not a preschool sense of humor. And we could do all these crazy things. The first show I wrote for them was a show called Flyboy.
I was just about to bring that one up.
Oh, really? Well, Flyboy came because I used to love watching, back when I was a little kid, on Saturday afternoons, they would show horror movies, like old 30s, 40s, 50s horror movies on Saturday afternoon, like in broad daylight. And I remember being 5 because it was right before I moved. So I remember specifically where I was. And it was right before I moved out of New York down to North Carolina. And the original Fly with Vincent Price was on a Saturday afternoon show. And I was so terrified, even though it was sunny out. This old black and white movie was just really, really horrifying to me.
Yeah,
So
I can't watch horror movies.
Yeah, I'm not good with horror either, James. Like, it's not my thing. And I guess I was really scarred by the original Fly. And that's where that one came from. So like, the idea of Timmy being a fly with a Timmy head and switching it with a giant Timmy with a fly head, that his parents really didn't notice was anything was different. Like, that seemed that
just shows how dumb they are, I will say, because they were I remember one episode, it's like, what do you think we are, nitwits?
and they were, and it was
absolutely, they were so stupid.
delightful nitwits. It was wonderful how nitwitty they were. So it was really fun to write. And I think the chance to write magic, like writing magic is always fun, right? Like you can literally make anything happen. And animation is the form to do it in. It's just great.
Well, for any of the listeners who haven't seen the Flyboy episode, basically there was everyone in Dimsdale, which is, for some of you who don't know, the neighborhood or city rather, I don't know what it was, in which the Fairly OddParents was set, but everyone in Dimsdale was going to be watching the 3D premiere of a movie called I Was a Teenage Blowfly, and Timmy was dying to see it, but it wasn't for people his age. It wasn't rated R. It was rated FTT. Far too terrifying for Timmy Turner.
That's right. He was specifically forbidden from watching that. That's right.
Yeah, it's so funny. Call out one person.
That's right.
I feel like Timmy was always called out. Like, even the theme song, Timmy is an average kid that no one understands. Da-da. Mom and Dad and Vicky always giving his demands. Bad twerp! Doing a room up in his room is broken instantly. But his magic little fish will grant his every wish, cause in reality they are his odd parents, fairly odd parents, wands and wings, floaty crowny things, odd parents, fairly odd parents. Some of them are kind of out of my head.
No, you pulled that up really well.
Yeah, obtuse rubber goose, green moose, bottle juice, giant snake, birthday cake, large fry, chocolate shake. Isn't that murder? I'm just saying, he had Vicky turned into a birthday cake.
Well, Vicky was pretty mean.
I was just about to say, she was like a murderer herself. I remember episodes where she would be chasing him around with a goalie mask and a chainsaw. Like, that's a reference to old horror movies, pretty much.
Yeah, yep. she was, and that was one of the fun things about Odd Parents, was that because it was not a little kid show. I mean, the market is really 6 to 11 on up. I think that the fun of it is that you don't, with shows that are a little bit older, you don't have to, of course there are still standards and practices. The by which I mean there's literally every company has a division called standards and practices, where they make sure that kids aren't going to, you're not modeling things that kids could do that would really hurt them, that if there's violence, that it's cartoony violence. And they're very careful about what you say, but they're much more careful in a preschool show, and
especially now.
well, sure, right, and fittingly so, because when you're a preschooler, you have a lot less discernment over this is real, this is not real, this could hurt, this won't hurt. I should say this in front of grandma, I shouldn't say this in front of grandma.
We had that rule when I was doing improv, the grandma rule.
Oh, really? What was the grandma rule? Like,
basically, it was like, what are some things that you wouldn't want a grandmother to hear you doing? And like, for example, like I remember we were doing an improv skit. This was when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And somebody's like, okay, I'm about to get turned. And then my improv teacher was like, okay, grandma doesn't like underage drinking.
Got it. Right. So like, you kind of have to know your audience, but there's a lot more stuff that you can, that you can get away with. And because older kids are not as impressionable. And so there's a lot of, it's kind of liberating to be able to write for that age. So the one I'm thinking of is not an Odd Parents, but I wrote an Ultimate Spider-Man that featured Deadpool, called Ultimate Deadpool. And that was so much fun because I remember working with the writer Joe Kelly, who was one of the head writers on the show. Is a great writer, awesome person as well. And Joe, I was like, okay, I remember getting an outline from them because Man of Action was the company he worked for, and they would kind of give you a pretty clear outline of what they wanted, the story beats that they wanted to see. And I remember getting the outline, and like the last act was, I forget how it said, James, but it was like Deadpool does some crazy stuff and he and Spidey fight. And I was like, okay, when you say Deadpool does some crazy stuff, how crazy can I get?
Yeah,
because
like cartoon violence.
I was like, let me know how far I can go. He's like, it's up to you. And I was like, okay. So I ended up having, I can't remember why, but like Deadpool like poofed himself into a Santa suit and rode off in the sky on a sled pulled by alligators or something. Like there was,
oh, yikes.
Yeah, there was this like crazy, there was this crazy like ho ho ho, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night moment with pulled by alligators. And I was like, they're never going to let me keep this. They're never going to keep this in. And they totally kept it in because it's Deadpool and because it's not a preschool show. And we were able to do some pretty envelope pushing stuff.
Especially on a cartoon. Yeah.
On that show. Yeah. And so I like doing that. I love I'd love to do more of that.
Well, before I get into the Marvel cartoons that you had written, one last question about the Fairly OddParents. Did you have a favorite character on that show to write for?
Oh, Cosmo, always Cosmo. I mean, Cosmo.
Great answer.
I mean, it's always Cosmo, right? Because he's so loopy and so delusional, and also so deep and so heartfelt. And so, I think he was definitely my favorite.
And with what we were saying about Vicky being murderous, it's crazy. Gray Delisle, from the conversations that I've had with her, I haven't had a full conversation with her yet, but I've talked to her a couple of times. She is totally the opposite of Vicky.
Yeah. Very, very lovely person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I'm in awe of voiceover artists. I think the ones who are working who've worked on Odd Parents, are some of the very, very, very best in the business, and the things they can do and create with just a microphone in their mouth is just out of this world.
Nice. With what we were talking about with the lesson in the food fight episode, not just looking at it and being like, ugh. Like, I've learned to try new foods recently, and it's been helping a lot. Actually, I've been quite enjoying a lot of the new stuff I've been tasting. So I remember an episode where I don't think you wrote this one. This would have been when I was really young, but basically Timmy's parents were feeding him spinach, and he throws it to Cosmo and Wanda, and they just neutralize it. And he's like, okay, and now that I ate all my spinach, it's time for dessert.
Right. So,
and in that episode, the wish was that all the food in the world would be dessert.
Yeah, I definitely didn't write that one, but I remember it very well. And like it's with Odd Parents, because there is nothing is too mean, really. Like, Timmy really does get dumped on.
Oh yeah, almost all the time.
But there's
like
love
Charlie
in there.
Brown.
I mean, yeah, right. Like, that's what Timmy lives for. But honestly, there is love, certainly, between Timmy and Cosmo and Wanda. And his parents love him. They're just so dim. But like, that's again what I said before, where I don't love stuff that gets too mean. Like, where I'm not there let's just say there are some grown-up shows where like things can get awful mean, and there's not a lot of love. And so Odd Parents was a show that did have a soft, gooey heart, but like a pretty tough exterior, and that's cool for me. I like that,
especially with Vicky and with Crocker and Jorgen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's some of those characters who are secondary characters, but there's no question that Timmy and Cosmo and Wanda love each other, and would be lost without each other. So.
Oh, absolutely. I remember one episode where it was Timmy's birthday, and Jorgen's present to Timmy was, "You lose your fairy godparents," but Vicky was torturing him on his birthday, so it's like, oh, you get to keep them.
See, like, there's, even as mean or sarcastic as some incidents could get, it really was about a kid who loves his friends, right? And who, he is a good kid at heart. Like, he's not a rotten bad kid. Like, he's really a good kid, even though he's pretty out there.
Mm-hmm. So before you did Ultimate Spider-Man and Marvel's Avengers Assemble, were you a Marvel Comics fan?
Yeah, I mean, I had been as a kid. I think now there are sort of Marvel super fans with the advent of the movies.
My best friend Sean and I are great examples of that.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I was not, I had been a bigger reader of comic books when I was a kid, and like in my teens and early 20s. So there, I found myself playing catch up a little bit when I got into the Marvel world. And I was, kind of like, okay, I have to catch up on a whole bunch of characters and storylines. But Spider-Man was always one of my very, very favorites. So coming into it first in the Spider-Man world was like, oh my God, I get to write for somebody that a character I had loved and admired since I was a little kid. Was really dreamy.
I'd love to write a Spider-Man film, because I love the latest ones that they did. They show Spider-Man to be, well, really Peter Parker rather, to be very youthful. And the ones before those did too, but now, you actually get to see that youthfulness in him, and I like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that every iteration of Spider-Man sort of takes him a little bit at a different age. Even if he's the same age, he's still different. Has kind of he's kind of aimed at a different age group, even if he's the same age, right? So
Mhm.
he's sort of maybe a different emotional age that he's at. And it's kind of interesting to see that character develop and be kind of his age play out in different ways, in the very different ways people play him.
Right. So what are you working on right now?
So right now, yeah, working on a pilot. And I have a Disney show that I am developing that I
Animated?
yes, I can
Okay.
say that. But I can't tell what it's about just yet. So there's that, and my own pilot is live action with puppets. So there's that. So
Nice.
coming back to that part of myself. Believe it or not, I just returned to the stage. I returned to acting for the first time
Oh.
in several years. A play that a friend wrote. We had the chance during the pandemic to put it on film in an empty theater because it's empty due to the pandemic. So I just spent a week putting this role on film, which was cool. And I'm writing plays again too. So like I love being able to write, to work with a bunch of, I love my TV writing. I'll never give up my theater writing as well. And I'm working on my book, which is called How to Be a Writing Superhero.
Wow.
And it's a book of writing advice, and looking forward to kind of getting that out in the world. So,
I'll have to buy it.
well, I would love that. I've got a little ways to go to get it on paper still, but that's the project I'm kind of working on later today after I get off the phone with you. And yeah, it's kind of a really busy time,
Hmm.
which is good. I'm happy. And of course, Shark Dog is premiering at some point this year on Netflix via Nickelodeon. Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, a lot of hopefully there'll be a lot of opportunities to see my stuff coming up.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to get nostalgic with me and with our listeners.
James, what a pleasure. So great. And so great to see somebody with such a broad knowledge and such a love for all this great stuff that's out there. Makes me so happy.
Oh, thank you. I'm very glad that I've been able to do that.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much, and best to you.
Thank you very much. And to the listeners, happy Easter, and stay tuned because Ed and I have been talking about retro cartoons. Stay tuned because the next guest coming to Nostalgia Talk will be somebody who I'm sure that some of you, well, if you're a little bit older than I am, you probably know who this person is from retro cartoons. If you grew up with the Disney afternoon, then you probably watched Adventures of Gummy Bears and Darkwing Duck. Joining me will be the voice of Sunny Gummy from Gummy Bears and Honker Muddlefoot from Darkwing Duck, Katie Lee. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to chatting with Katie. So if any of you guys out there have any questions that you'd like me to ask Katie, of course, hardly anyone ever does, but if you do, send me a message, leave a comment, be sure to like the official Nostalgia Talk Facebook page, link in the description, and I will see you soon with another upcoming video that's not Nostalgia Talk related. But if you're not interested in that, stay tuned for my interview with Katie Lee. Peace.